Go ahead and start the recording. And can someone confirm for me that it is recording? Sweet, all right. Thank you guys. So yeah, we will go ahead and get started then. Thank you for coming with us tonight to our second info night, and we will be talking about substance use disorders as it relates to those experiencing homelessness, but we will also talk a little bit about MSP. So with that being said, this is sort of where our Mustard Seed Project gets its name from. We aren't a religiously affiliated organization. However, this is a really nice metaphor, if you will. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree. So, I feel like that's a really nice representative way of thinking about MSP and what we're really aiming to do here. Start small with local volunteers like we are doing right now in our community in order to make a big difference. And I will pass it off to our, oh my gosh, I didn't introduce myself. Sorry, I'm Gabby. I am our president, but we will introduce all of ourselves a little bit later. And I will pass it off to Madeline for the slide that I just passed. Sorry, I don't usually do these ones. All right, Madeline, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. So I just want to talk a little bit about our mission, a little bit beyond the beautifully defined version. I'm not as eloquent, but I like to just let us know that we're a lot about hand up, not hand out. We are equal with the people who are experiencing homelessness or anyone who needs help. This is a very helpful organization. We're very oriented on education, providing resources, and just helping those who are in need or just need any access to information. And I think that's really important. Like right now, and you'll learn later if you join our chapter, we are working on a thing called a resource guide, and that's just a local information sheet, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, just to try to educate people around us. So we're very much an organization around helping others, teamwork, and education, and I think that's pretty important. So on to the next slide, please. So our team, I actually have notes for this one. So we've got 8 people on what we call our board of directors. This is our leadership team for our individual chapter. There's an MSP headquarters where, if you see Geetha and Martin on here, they're part of that kind of group. But for the people who are mostly going to be in Lane County, there's 8 of us, and you can kind of see on the slideshow right now, they're the first 4. Our goal, since we haven't been able to do outreach, has been doing research and just acquainting ourselves with the regulations and laws of Oregon's homelessness policies, and I think that's really cool. So I guess I'll jump it back to you, Gabby, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Gabby. I am the president of the UO MSP chapter. I'm a 4th year, graduating in June, thank God, with a major in political science and double minors in women's gender and sexuality studies and legal studies. And I will pass it right back to Madeline.
This is very well coordinated. Hi, I'm Madeline. I am a 4th year as well. I am a music education major, and yeah, I'm super excited to help Gabby lead this wonderful chapter. And I'll pass this on to Spencer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Spencer. I'm the secretary of the UO chapter here with MSP. I'm a 4th year also, the 3rd one here now, and I'm getting my major in jazz studies with a mostly kind of focus, not really specific, but actually a little bit in composition. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I am the treasurer of the UO chapter. I am graduating next spring 2022. I'm majoring in psychology and anthropology. And then Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a sophomore and I major in political science, and I am the fundraising chair. And I'll pass it off to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a 2nd year at University of Oregon, and I am one of the social chairs for the MSP chapter. And I'm majoring in business administration, and I'll pass it to Lizzie.
Hello, my name's Lizzie. I am also a social chair. Megan and I are kind of co-captains. I am double majoring in psychology and women's gender and sexuality studies, and I'm going to graduate spring 2022.
And hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm the volunteer coordinator. I'm a sophomore, and my major is family and human services.
Heck yeah. And we also have Geeta and Martin here tonight, who aren't technically part of our board, but they are part of the leadership team. So I will let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin. I'm the project developer for Mustard Seed Project.
Hello, my name is Geeta, and I am the director of recruitment. And yeah, I've been around for a few years now, and this project is very, very near and dear to my heart. So thank you so much for being here tonight with us.
Yes, thank you guys. All right, so we will be talking a little bit about our service. Wait, is this my slide? Yeah, and what we are doing is training people to become a community advocate, one. And, if you join MSP, you'll sort of learn the different structures. There's 1, 2, and 3, along with the leadership team, but we can get more into that later. But what you need to know is that, we will be training you if you choose to join us to gain experience and really deepen your knowledge as it relates to homelessness in Eugene, in Lane County, and all over. And we will be participating in service operations like homeless outreach. Although we aren't doing it right now for the safety of everybody involved, we are still working hard to make sure that we can connect people with resources. We are also doing a lot of fundraising for our community relief fund, which we will talk about a little bit later also. This training date is wrong. That's my bad. I was supposed to fix that. But we will be having training on the 24th, I believe. That's okay. I was almost done with that slide anyway. We'll be doing a training on the 24th to really just make sure that we're all on the same page. And we will also talk about that a little bit later.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys a little bit about our resource project. So because of COVID times, we are currently mostly focusing on resource project more than anything else right now. Normally pre-COVID, we'd be working in person at these shelters and communities, but with COVID, we can't directly work with anybody or like the people who are experiencing homelessness in our community. So instead, we've tried implementing some projects that can still let us communicate and also work with these individuals by connecting them with resources and getting in touch with resources around like local businesses who are maybe willing to help, provide some relief for families or, anybody in need really. So like the main purpose of this is just providing contact information just for all people experiencing homelessness. So children, families, elders, or individuals just by themselves. And our big focus is finding basic needs, so shelter, food, water, getting like a shower, that type of thing. We're also focusing on mental health resources and also legal aid. And then, really just trying to reach out to these people and trying to connect them to like the businesses and like the resources that are available to them.
Alrighty, so right now we are on Info Night number 2. We have another Info Night tomorrow for Q&A. Wednesday, the 14th, applications are due, and then we are going to have our interviews either on Saturday or Sunday.
All right, so here are some requirements that we have for the chapter. Just to preface this real quick, like we know that right now we're still in the middle of a pandemic, although hopefully with more vaccination rollouts that'll hopefully get a little nicer soon, but we understand that life happens. So if you have difficulty meeting any of these requirements, please feel free to talk to us and we can work with you on it, of course. So the first requirement is that you attend weekly cohort meetings with your assigned board member. You must attend 2 general meetings per quarter, and you attend 1 mandatory workshop per quarter. And you must attend CA1 training in order to become a community advocate.
And then we have social media here, and right now we have a Facebook and an Instagram, and we're working on getting a Twitter up. And if you can follow us and like us on there, then we always share like what's going on with us and stuff.
Yeah, and here are some links that you can use your phone to go into. We can also drop the links in the chat. But our Engage page, UO uses a website called Engage in order to engage its students. That just has a bunch of different student organizations on campus. And to be honest, I myself am still figuring this out. So as the club moves forward, we will definitely be using this more often. And here is the link to our application. It is a quick Google Doc, or Google Forms, I guess I should say. And we can also drop the link in the chat a little bit later. Does anybody have any questions about anything before we sort of move on to our like lecture part of the night?
I was wondering how long the weekly like cohort meetings are.
Yeah, definitely. We typically only go for about an hour-ish. You know, last week we had about a 10-minute meeting to get ready for this, and you know, sometimes they go a little bit longer. But generally about 45 minutes to an hour, and if it will be longer, we will for sure let you know. So, you know, we can plan for that. Good question though. Does anybody else have any questions? Sweet, all right. And then I will just pass over the mic and the screen sharing powers to Martin, who will give the presentation on substance use disorders, or SUDS.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. My name is Martin. It's nice to see some old faces as well as new ones. I know that I look like I could be a freshman entering college, but I graduated in 2019. I've been with Mustard Seed Project for about 5 years. Right after college, I went into case management. So I worked with folks who are experiencing homelessness, helping them get connected to housing. And then currently, I'm a volunteer at Mustard Seed Project as the project developer. And then I'm the director of a small nonprofit doing homeless services called Uplift. So today we're going to be talking about a very important topic. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's substance use disorders. In the past, when I've given this talk, you know, some people have felt that there was some content that was triggering. So if you feel the need to step away, please go ahead and do that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I also think that this topic is very important because a lot of times when we talk about homelessness, one of the, it seems like the instincts for us to think about is actually drugs. And so I'm excited to dive into this for everybody. So let me share my screen. All right. Okay, everyone can see it? Awesome, awesome. Alrighty, so today we'll go over terminology. I'll go over substance use disorders in the general population. We'll go over subpopulations, and then we'll go over treatment. I'll try to breeze through some of the more definition stuff so that we can have a discussion and talk about more number 4, just treatment. And the reason why I think that's really interesting is because currently, even within medicine, we don't currently have the best practice on how to help someone who's going through a substance use disorder. Okay. So intro. So this is from one of our clients before, but I think it's a really stark thing to hear. You know, I asked, what is something you think that people don't understand about homelessness? And they told us that it's one of the biggest things people do not realize is how easy it is for people on the streets to get access to drugs. And it's true that a lot of people prey on folks who are on the streets, you know, who have an existing substance use disorder. Another thing that I did not realize when I became a case manager was how many people actually develop a substance use disorder while they're on the streets. So homelessness situation might be triggered by something that's economical, like there was a car accident, you couldn't afford payment. But there's a lot of folks who, unfortunately, you know, will drink alcohol to stay warm at night, or will use an amphetamine actually to stay up because they're worried about being victimized at night, or they're worried about where they're going to sleep. And there is a lot of access. And so there is a crisis when it comes to our folks who are sleeping out there. In terms of some basic terminology, The definition of a homeless status, according to HUD, there's 3 definitions. The first one is literally or unsheltered homelessness. So you can think of folks who are living in their cars. I'm sorry, you can think of folks who are sleeping under, yes, in cars, in parks, under bridges, around the streets. There's sheltered homelessness. You could think of folks who are in a shelter, hotel paid with a voucher, or place not intended for sleeping. And then there's a third category, which is housing unstable, which is someone who lives in someone else's home, but didn't have an arrangement allowing habitation for at least 5 days a week. So the definition of a substance use disorder is a medical condition in which the use of one or more chemical substances leads to substantial impairment or distress. So, typically we think of drugs as more things that are illicit, right? Like Molly or, cocaine, but, alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogenics, inhalants, opioids, sedatives, hypnotics, amphetamines, and tobacco are all classified in the DSM-5 as something that, as a chemical that can cause a substance use disorder. Just for our conversation, we're gonna use what's called person-first language. And really what this is just a tool. It's being mindful that we are students and there's a lot of privilege associated with that. It's really just a way for us to be respectful of the population we're talking about. And it seeks to not make someone's situation their identity. So instead of saying, we're gonna talk about the homeless, or the alcoholics, we might say something like, we're gonna talk about folks experiencing homelessness. And again, the idea is just to be respectful. It's just a tool, so let's all be mindful of that. Okay. So in the general population, all right, so some quick facts. So Okay, so in the United States, prior to COVID, and these numbers have skyrocketed during the pandemic, there has always been a pretty high usage of substances, especially when you compare it to other countries. There are countries who are going through more dire economic situations, or going through different, stressful, distressing situations. The United States tends to use a lot of substances. From 2001 to 2013, overdose mortality involving prescription pain relievers increased more than 200%, and deaths related to heroin overdoses more than tripled from 2011 to 2014. And one thing that's important to note is that these were prescribed. So people would get them prescribed from their physician, and then they would develop a substance use disorder. In one study of almost 500,000 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, researchers found that 82 to 93% of soldiers were diagnosed with a substance use disorder, at least one other mental health disorder, mainly PTSD. And this is something that I did not know about, but workers in construction, food service, and manufacturing jobs are particularly susceptible to highly addictive amphetamine usage as a result of long working hours and pressure for administrators to remain productive. And the more I've worked with folks who, struggle with usage, the more that I've seen that this is something that is true. People who work long hours do use amphetamines, and eventually, for a lot of folks, do get addicted. And just breezing through the numbers again. So this is from SAMHSA in 2019. So 20.6%, or 50 million people age 18 or older identified as having a mental illness. 7.7%, or 19 million people aged 18 or older had a substance use disorder. And 3.8% of people aged 18 or older had both a substance use disorder co-occurring with a mental illness. And I think it's important to note that generally people don't feel comfortable about talking about these things because of stigma. So I would presume that these are actually much higher. So stigma. In the United States, only 1 in 9 of the more than 23 million individuals with a substance use disorder voluntarily or involuntarily enter treatment. Barriers to treatment include, so just as you can just shout it out. What do y'all think are some of the reasons why someone might not want to go to treatment, or what are the barriers that folks have to getting treatment? So I see money, stigma, distrust, an ID, healthcare access, transportation, all good things. So I'll go ahead and show the answers. So uninsured or underinsured, stigma is actually the #1 reason why someone reports not seeking treatment. Lack of mental health services in underserved areas or rural areas. And I'm sure that is a big situation in Oregon. Insufficient flexibility due to work or childcare, transportation, and language barriers. And I will say that one of the things that's notable is that, a lot of people are if they're working or they're taking care of their children, they're much more willing to forego their own healthcare in order to take care of the children or take care of work. So sometimes that becomes its own barrier. Okay. So we're going to talk about subpopulations. So implications of the war on drugs. I think, or of the war on drugs, I think that it's really hard to talk about substance use disorders without having to talk about this topic. But 1/5 of the incarcerated population, or 500,000 individuals, are serving time for a drug charge. Another 1.15 million people are on probation or parole for drug-related offenses. I'm just going to read through this and then I'll give my take on it. Incarceration is linked with increased mortality from overdose. In the first 2 weeks after they're released from prison, individuals are almost 13 times more likely to die than the general population. The leading cause of death among recently released individuals is overdose. During that period, individuals are at a 129% greater risk of dying from an overdose to the general public. So one of the biggest things about homeless services and identifying who is likely to be homeless is doing just that. Who is most likely to be homeless? There are certain waves of people that we know have a likelihood to become homeless. One being children in the foster care system, folks who are aging into homelessness, who are relying only on their social security. But a big population that people tend not to think about are folks who are incarcerated, right? And we had a community forum where I think someone put it really well, and they said that once someone does time, they shouldn't have a life sentence after they're released, and we should stop punishing people. But reentry is what it's called. It's something that I'm particularly interested in my work, but a lot of times you're not really allowed to provide services for someone while they're in prison. And so when they get out, you're helping them when it's too late and when they're already on the streets. And so that's why you see here, 2 weeks after they're released from prison, individuals are almost 13 times more likely to die than the general population. Implications on BIPOC individuals. Black individuals are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana charges than their white peers. Black Americans make up 30% of all drug-related arrests, despite accounting for only 12.5% of all substance users. Just another statistic that is disproportionate, but Black individuals make up 40% of the entire homeless population. And then down here, Black Americans are nearly 6 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug-related offenses than their white counterparts, despite equal substance usage rates. Almost 80% of people serving time for a federal drug offense are Black or Latino. In the state prisons, people of color make up 60% of those serving time for drug charges. So I think the takeaway from this is, one, that homelessness is very much something that intersects with other systems, including incarceration, including the implications of race on all these systems. So a lot of this does connect. All right, homeless and incarcerated populations exhibit the highest rate of substance use disorders. Specific barriers to these subpopulations include, all right, so this is the last talking slide, but what are some things you put in the chat that someone who is in a homeless situation might face to getting, what are the barriers they might face to getting access to treatment? Knowing where to go. See, let's do like 2 more. Transportation again, money for treatment. ID, it's a very important one. Yeah, ID is one of those things that it's so unfortunate that it becomes such a huge barrier for so many people. But I'll go through them. Significant transportation barriers, lack of access to the phone or internet, little or no positive social networks, a substance use conducive environment, underinsured or underinsured day-to-day challenges to survive. And I'll just point out two here just to talk about, but little or no positive social networks. Usually the way I explain that is, let's say for me, God forbid, I was to get into an accident that prevented me from working. There's a huge chance that I would be able to go to my parents and say, hey, I'm not able to work anymore. And they would take care of me. But for a lot of folks, they might not have that type of social support or that economic support. And then day-to-day challenges to survive. I remember one time I was talking to an individual and I asked him, what is your plan from here? And then he was telling me, honestly, Martin, I don't really have a plan anymore, right? There's a lot of folks, when you're constantly in survival mode, when you're constantly not knowing what you're going to eat or where you're going to sleep at night, it's really hard to just have a plan because you're so focused on your own survival. All right, so prospects for treatment. All right, so this is the big one. So this is becomes an interesting conversation because it gets into a lot of important themes when we talk about homelessness. I think that a lot of times people tend to think that it's, people take a side where it's all individuals' fault for their situation. And then some people say it's the system, and so, in my experience, I think it's been fairly gray, but with lots of systemic factors contributing, and those are the things that we should be focusing on. But one is called the therapy community model. This is a prospect for treatment. This is what is commonly known as AA, or like rehab rehabilitation. So this is considered high barrier to entry because you have to abstain from using drugs in order to be in the program. That is a condition of being able to get treated. The underlying philosophy is that the individual is at the center of their care. And so the individual must do some kind of work, must do some type of inner searching rehab in order for them to be free of their substance use disorder. Key findings are that motivation and program entry are key predictors of success. So in the first week, if you say, I want to do this, you're likely to succeed. But if you say, I don't want to do this, and you're forced to do it, you're very unlikely to succeed. And then one meta-analysis, which is just analysis of analyses of 7 programs with a sample size of about 1,000 folks, found that the 12-month retention rate ranged from 3 to 21%. So there's a lot of folks who are going through this type of rehab and they're not able to see success. And when you are not successful the first time, it's very hard for you to want to come back. And I think a lot of times this type of failure is where the stigma gets perpetuated. Yeah. And so I'm going to contrast that with harm reduction. So has anyone heard of harm reduction before? So I'm seeing a lot of nods, okay, which is good. I looked it up in Eugene. There are actually harm reduction clinics, which is interesting. So that might be something to look at. But harm reduction is generally this idea that instead of abstinence, what we do is we reduce harm. So it's considered a lower barrier to entry for that reason. And the underlying philosophy is that SUDS are a medical condition and that the individual capabilities exist on a spectrum. So you want to reduce harm, even if it means sustaining an active addiction. The key findings are that methadone and buprenorphine reduce illicit opioid use, increase treatment retention, and reduce overdose mortality. So essentially, as an example of one clear one of harm reduction, is, for example, sex ed and contraceptives, right? So instead of saying abstain from sex, we talk about safety, we talk about education as a way to reduce harm. Another one that is controversial, but it's starting to get a lot more traction, is a needle exchange program. And this is more relevant to substance use disorders. So essentially, the idea is that there's different forms, but at the old place I used to work at, we used to praise ourselves that we would give out enough needles in the community that would fill a football stadium. And the idea is that you go out to the community and you give people clean needles so that they're not injecting them with needles that are infected. It could be HIV, it could be hepatitis. And what you do is you significantly reduce the amount of people that die from their substance use disorder. And I think overall, the idea is treating a substance use disorder as a disease versus treating it as a moral failing of a person. So I'm going to show 2 videos, and then we can go ahead and just have a discussion about them broadly, and then we can contrast. But this is a good video.
Hey, ho! Crime and drugs
Can everyone hear it?
have got to go! For 4 long years, homeowners on the west side, one area there, have been begging elected officials to clean up their streets. They blame the Haven for Hope shelter for bringing alcoholics, drug users, and prostitutes to that area. Well, we ran a crime tracker for the area immediately surrounding the shelter. In the past 2 years, police reported 453 drug and alcohol violations, 300 assaults, 227 thefts, and 54 home break-ins. But tonight, News 4 San Antonio's Emily Bauckham is breaking the story of a program that might finally solve the crime problem there. It's new tonight at 10.
It's an age-old question. How do you help someone who doesn't want help? Well, the county is working to test out a solution that would take the worst offenders off the streets and legally force them into rehab. Every day, Haven for Hope helps people beat addiction, get a job, find a home. But spend a day on the streets.
We've got a lot of strange rules.
And you'll find not every homeless person is willing to live clean and follow the strict guidelines required to live on Haven's campus.
You go in there, you got to dig in your pocket. You go in there, they treat you like you on some kind of medication.
Many prefer the shelter's Prospects Courtyard, a place where you can get the basics, food, a shower, a mat to sleep on.
We're just all common folk.
And still come and go as you please.
I mean, I prefer to be out here than being there, you know.
The courtyard is what neighbors are talking about when they blame crime on Haven for Hope.
The site is for drug activity.
And just yesterday, right there in that corner, there was some guy hitting each other with bottles in the head. And
the transient population.
Choice of life.
People who turn down help.
I chose that life.
They're the hardest to reach.
Maybe later I'll get better, hopefully.
And a constant frustration for neighbors and elected leaders alike.
Certain individuals have come to my office and said, I just came from another city because I hear that this is a Ritz-Carlton of homeless shelters. And this is where I want it to be because this is the nicest place in the country.
We're speaking to the individuals who have been arrested 10, 20, 30, 100 times. What do we do with them? And
are there really people who have been arrested 100 times?
Yes, easily. More than 100 times.
So how do you stop the cycle? Judge Oscar Kazin says this could be the answer.
In Texas, we have the ability to execute what's called a chemical dependency warrant.
That warrant allows judges to order suspects into treatment rather than jail. It's a unique solution, so the county is working to find funding for a pilot program to treat 10 homeless volunteers.
I would much rather throw money at something I know works than hope works.
Even a pilot program would cost thousands of dollars, but if forced rehab works, it could free up jail cells and emergency rooms and give even those who choose to be homeless a second chance.
And sometimes I feel like giving up because I don't have a friend in the world. What do people feel the same way on the streets?
Haven for Hope supports forced rehab as yet another tool to fight crime. But the shelter told us late this afternoon, this is not the only way they're trying to be good neighbors. The staff here exchanges information all the time with police, and they hit the streets.
We have an outreach team that combs the streets daily, looking for persons that are homeless. And they try to bring those folks into Haven for Hope so that they can access services and we hope get back on their feet.
The forced rehab pilot program is at least 1 year away from happening. But the good news for Haven's neighbors, there are people working to solve the crime problem. Reporting downtown, Emily Bauckham.
All right, so let's have just a brief discussion to recap that video. And Gabby, HIV Alliance was one of the ones I did find, which is awesome. So just a brief recap. So what are some initial thoughts on that video? There are no wrong answers.
It was kind of frustrating to hear them focus on the crime problem instead of talking about individuals as humans and humans who are suffering from mental illness. So that like they started with that, ended with that, and it was just frustrating.
I definitely agree. It always makes me feel really like gross watching this video.
Yeah, and like having like how they talk or focus a lot on how they're like forcing people into it kind of makes it sound pretty bad, honestly. But I mean, it's like the thought is like there, but not like the best execution on the idea, I guess, or it doesn't come off that way.
Madeline said it felt derogatory when they say transient. Any other thoughts? And I'd love to kind of also expand if anyone has thoughts on the forced chemical dependency warrant. So that was something, so California was in the news a lot for the homelessness crisis. And a lot of people were saying that a chemical dependency warrant would be a good policy. Anybody have any thoughts on that briefly? So Melissa says, if someone is forced into rehab, it isn't going to work. So kind of going off what Hannah was talking about, I thought the line was interesting where he said, I would rather invest something that I know works versus hope. And I think that speaks to the attitudes, because he actually doesn't know that this will work. Like there's data that shows that abstinence-based treatment doesn't work. And I went to a conference on substance use disorders, and someone brought up, why don't we use chemical dependency? Do you think it'll work? And someone brought up a pretty interesting point that, well, the first they're talking about how we should like always try to make the discussion not have to always be about this, because it's very counterproductive. But they pointed to the Stanford prison experiment. Have y'all heard of that by chance? And what happens when you give people power over the others, when you to force something upon them, and people who are homeless are already vulnerable. And so my fear is, what would happen to folks if they're forced into rehab? That'd be something that I'm sure there would be abuse of power. Okay. So any other things happening on any other thoughts of that video? Then we could move on to the next one. No. Gabby says it's a really exciting experiment. If you have time, I would sure watch a documentary on it. Yes, I agree. Yeah, and also reflecting on what folks were saying about treating folks as humans, I could totally agree. I think it's very much antiquated where I think a lot of people understand now that a substance use disorder is classified as a mental health crisis versus someone choosing to constantly use substances. At that point, I don't know how much of a choice it is. Okay, so all right, so next one, last video, then we'll end with another discussion. So this is about harm reduction, and this gentleman will explain it much better than me.
What is harm reduction? It's policies, programs, and practices that aim to reduce the harms associated with the use of psychoactive drugs in people who are unable or unwilling to stop. Harm reduction is a concept that is very important to understand because the reality of opiate addiction is that some people just can't or are not willing to stop. They will do whatever they need to in order to prevent getting violently ill. Without treatment, drug users may steal, harm others, or harm themselves to feed their addiction. I'm Mike, your pharmacist, and this is The Daily Dose. We find that communities that use harm reduction strategies like methadone maintenance treatment or Suboxone maintenance treatment see a drop in crime rates. So not only does this program have a positive impact on patients, but it can also be beneficial for the community. Harm reduction was first introduced to prevent the spread of HIV amongst injecting drug users, to decrease the spread of the illness and decrease the socioeconomic impact of HIV. Now we are using variations of that approach to combat the opiate crisis. Methadone and Suboxone are harm reduction strategies that are widely used today. These are long-acting opiates with a slower onset of action than heroin and other highly addictive opiates. So why are some opiates more addictive than others? As a general rule, drugs that have a quick onset of action and a short duration of action tend to be more addictive. Essentially, drugs that have a quick on, quick off effect are more addictive. Now, methadone and Suboxone, they're thought to prevent that immediate high because it has a slower onset of action and a longer duration of action. And that's why they are thought to be less addictive. But isn't substituting heroin with methadone just substituting one addiction for another? Essentially, yeah, it is. It isn't substituting one addiction for another. The hope here is that reducing the continued craving of drugs can help patients make positive changes, like find steady work or work on their personal relationships. These programs are incremental in their nature. Drug users are much more likely to take multiple tiny steps rather than take one or two huge steps. The idea here is that small gains for many have more benefit for a community than heroic gains achieved for a select few. Harm reduction initiatives have a hierarchy of goals. Health clinicians acknowledge that there are several extremely important health priorities, but most of the attention is placed on keeping people who use drugs alive and preventing irreparable damage. Abstinence from drugs would be at the end of that hierarchy. Another point of emphasis is the prevention of harm, rather than on the prevention of the drug use itself. Harm reduction is based on the recognition that many people throughout the world continue to use psychoactive drugs, despite even the strongest efforts to prevent the initiation or continued use of drugs. An example of a harm reduction goal is to decrease consumption of drugs or decrease a specific route of administration, like stop injecting drugs while actively accepting that a client may be taking drugs orally. Other harm reduction strategies are education on safe opiate ingesting practices, access to safe supplies like sterile needles, alcohol swabs, mouthpieces, foil, meth pipes, sterile water, condoms, and safe disposable containers, easy access to naloxone kits, and training to use in case of an overdose, vaccinations for preventable illnesses like hepatitis B, and tests for infections like HIV, hepatitis B, and Hep C. More recently in Ontario, we're starting to embrace supervised consumption service sites. These are spots that are exempt from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. In these spaces, people can consume illicit drugs, whether by injection or inhalation, in a safe, supportive, hygienic environment under the supervision of staff who can intervene in the event of an overdose or other adverse event. How does harm reduction affect me? Methadone maintenance treatment programs have shown to decrease crime and public drug abuse in communities. Harm reduction initiatives are also relatively cheap. For example, education and clean supplies can prevent serious illnesses like Hep C and HIV, which can literally cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to treat. It also decreases the prevalence of the serious illness within society, preventing the spread of it. With that being said, it is still an extremely controversial topic that needs much improvement. Some believe that abstinence should still be the number one goal. From a socioeconomic perspective, some may not want to spend tax dollars on harm reduction initiatives like methadone or naloxone kits. Another concern is methadone or Suboxone being diverted on the street. Pharmacists and physicians and policymakers do what they can to prevent diversion, but we're not cops. Opiate drugs have street value, and this program inevitably supplies the street. There are also issues with the program itself. Patients are still dependent on opiate, and the program requires frequent doctor visits and observed doses at the pharmacy. It makes it difficult for clients to keep a job. It's even difficult to start a job once they are stable because methadone shows up in urine tests. There's a stigma that comes with methadone treatment, so clients feel the need to hide it from coworkers, family members, and the community. And frequent doctor visits and pharmacy visits make keeping methadone maintenance treatment a secret very difficult. I work in methadone and Suboxone dispensing pharmacies regularly, and I can tell you that it comes with a lot of very difficult decisions. I have my own opinions on harm reduction initiatives and how it can be improved, but I do enough talking. What's your opinion on harm reduction initiatives aimed at managing opiate addiction? Do you have opinions on how this program can be improved?
Okay. All right, so that was our last video, but any thoughts on that? Or any questions? Always welcome in the chat as well.
I personally enjoy, I guess enjoy isn't the right word, but I personally am generally supportive of harm reduction strategies. I come from a place where, you know, a lot of people use drugs, and I know naloxone has been going around a lot for preventing, you know, death by overdoses, and it's very much helped. Just so everybody knows, the community that I'm talking about specifically is like the Bay Area. Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, Fremont, those areas. So I've personally seen how it can be a good thing, and that is why I am in support of it. It can be improved, but everything can be improved, you know?
I don't know if it'd be considered under harm reduction, but I also thought like with the recent bill that got passed in like Oregon with like decriminalizing like small amounts of like harder drugs, like, you know, meth and like heroin and like stuff like that. I also think that's important instead of just like punishing them and putting them like in jail and stuff like that, actually, because that's not the best way, obviously. And so, yeah, I'm also a big supporter of harm reduction.
I think any other thoughts, but I think what's interesting is harm reduction is actually the opposite of abstinence. And so there's definitely a lot of people who feel that it's something that they would not support. And at times there are people, yeah. But any other thoughts from the crowd?
I think it's just like so controversial because of just like the stigma that's been around, and like the fact that the war on drugs has been around for just so long, that kind of coming to this kind of new concept of like, providing them with safer, alternatives and working with them. It's like just such a vast change over like the past, like, however long this has been around. And I just think it's like incredible to see, honestly, just like the change in like the stigma.
Mhm. Okay, I'll end with some stuff, just some other things to think about. Harm reduction, in my experience, has been a great alternative for folks who are currently using. I've referred people to clinics all the time. It has its limits where harm reduction is for opioids mostly. And so for folks who are having a meth use disorder, there's no harm reduction. There is no type of drug that is like methadone for opioids. And so it has its limits, and there's definitely more research that needs to be out there. And just from personal, experience as case manager, social worker, seeing someone go through a substance use disorder and helping them walk through that is a very difficult journey for a lot of people. And it comes with its own systemic challenges of not being able to access treatment. If you're homeless, it's hard to follow up with treatment or treatment plans, for all the reasons we talked about before. I have just some last things I want to say as a closing words. One thing about the name also, in addition to us being a small group trying to make a large difference, the name Mustard Seed also comes from the idea that if we just help one person, that makes a huge difference as well. And that would make all our difference worth everything. Yeah, I've been in this project for 5 years, and it is mind-blowing to think that we can go to Oregon. And so I'm really excited to what all of you are going to do. When I was doing case management, it was really hard. A lot of times it felt like there wasn't a lot of hope, but I really strongly believe that our generation is going to be really good about thinking about poverty and thinking about urban poverty. And I think in our generation, we might be able to envision societies that are built so that folks don't have to be on the streets. I welcome, and I think a lot of that hope comes from just being with folks like you. So I welcome you to this chapter. I'm excited for all the things you're going to do. I think this is definitely like an open source project for you to contribute to and make us better. And I know that you all will. So with that being said, thank you for listening to me tonight. I am excited to meet and see what all of y'all do.
Thank you so much, Martin. This has been great. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. We really do appreciate it. And if you have any questions that maybe you don't want to ask right now, tomorrow we are actually having an info night for a Q&A. So you can attend using the same Zoom ID, or you can email us with any questions. I dropped our socials and our application link in the chat. And I do want to say, the reason we have an application and interview process is because we work with populations that are targeted and ostracized. And so we really just want to make sure that everybody has good intentions, because, we don't want people who think negatively about people experiencing homelessness on our team for quite obvious reasons, I assume. So yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to ask or drop them in the chat or email, or come tomorrow and join us again. And yeah, I guess we can officially